Joining us today are two of the spearheading creatives behind the upcoming Kai-Sei Era, which launches an all-new Godzilla-centered shared universe at IDW Publishing. One is the editor of the entire Kai-Sei communique and the fan-favorite IDW hit Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees from good friend of the show, Patrick Horvath. The other is the Eisner Award-nominated writer of the aforementioned Godzilla #1 with artist Nikola Čižmešija, as well as fan-favorite series like Hack Slash, Local Man, Revival, and Money Shot. He is also headlining the upcoming Masters of the Universe miniseries, The Sword of Flaw, with Dark Horse Comics in the fall. It is our pleasure to welcome Jake Williams and Tim Seeley onto the Oblivion Bar Podcast.
Woo! Yeah,
Sure.
Welcome.
Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going?
Welcome, Jake and Tim. So glad you guys are here to talk about all things Godzilla. When IDW first reached out to us to talk to both of you gentlemen about this brand new universe over IDW, I was pretty excited, but I knew as soon as I mentioned it to Aaron, who is the, I think, maybe biggest kaiju fan that I know, at least in my friend circle, I knew that he would be even more excited. So I'm excited, but I know that he is even more excited to have you both here today. And I would love to start with you, Jake, actually, before we even get into a lot of the larger Godzilla conversation. Jake, I want to ask you, because I think, and this might be a loaded question, but I think a lot of comic readers don't really understand what goes into being a comic book editor. And I hate to put you on the spot here, but can you put together sort of a brief overview of what goes into being a comic book editor in 2025? And how did you end up leading the charge with this brand new Kai-Sei universe?
Yeah, so being a comic book editor can really change from company to company to person to book, right? It's a very fluctuating situation. But the way I look at it is it's similar to like a producer of a film, right? So it's my job as the person who's like running Godzilla to, first of all, make the hires, do the casting, figure out how many Godzilla books we want a year, kind of figure out the general direction and tone we're looking to aim for. And then I reach out to writers I want to work with. So like Tim, for example, I reached out to Tim. I solicited a pitch from Tim. We did like a round of notes or feedback on that pitch. I bring it to Toho. And then from there we do like, it's just kind of project managing and giving notes and feedback along the way. So I give notes on the script and the art and the whole thing. And then I bring in other people to do the kind of the sister books, and I make sure it all fits together and it's aiming in like kind of the right direction. So it's very just like top level tone setting, and then like nitty gritty project managing is the kind of the combo of the job.
I've heard that project manager sort of title usually in conjunction with being an editor, because it's a lot of pieces, again, sort of all aiming them in the correct direction. And Tim, I'd love to hear from you also on how you ended up kicking off this all new Godzilla universe. What was that initial conversation like with Jake and IDW? And how did you ultimately decide that this was going to be the very first entry in this brand new universe?
Well, I'd worked with Jake on Godzilla vs. Chicago, and because Jake correctly surmised that if he did a comic of Godzilla attacking Chicago and he didn't ask me, I would be so fucking mad. So Jake made the right choice, and we actually, I wrote and drew that story, and he and I had I think we had a pretty good time working on it together. And there's not many editors like Jake where you can work with them, like throw things back and forth. He puts the time in that's necessary. He pushes you, but he doesn't push you too hard. And so I think I was just like, this kid's got it going on. And then, he had called me and said, well, we have more Godzilla possibilities if you're interested. And he just threw out the idea of Godzilla shared universe and explained kind of the two other titles. And that just immediately set off. I grew up watching Godzilla movies. In my 20s, I watched all the Godzilla movies again. I've always been very familiar with Godzilla. So as soon as he started throwing out, we wanted to, and he said the magic words, which is, I want it to be comic booky. And that was like, I got it. I know what this has to be. And so, this idea of doing kind of a team, like a G-Force, but like through this American filter. And Jake had this idea of bringing in essentially a kid with the ability to punch Godzilla. And so we came up with Jason Braid. And we just kind of kept rocking it back and forth until I think we found something that, felt unique, even though it felt like it was part of this larger, tapestry that has been, 70, 80 years of Godzilla movies. So I think this one becomes the sort of, I don't want to say main book, but it's the flagship book because it centers the most on Godzilla and the relationship that these characters have with Godzilla. So the other books have characters who are peripheral to the world of Godzilla, and Godzilla appears, of course, as Godzilla should. But this one is really, it's Godzilla doing Godzilla shit, and the people who are charged with reacting to that, and also their history with Godzilla specifically. And our big sort of goal was to make it human and personal and honest, and in a way that I think, we'd seen in Godzilla movies before, but kind of sometimes is something that get lost in the spectacle. So that was our goal.
And from my perspective on why Tim, it was just this thing where we worked with him on Godzilla vs. Chicago. And Tim is he's such a great writer, and he's such a veteran of comic book writing, but he's also just so kind and so cool and so enthusiastic. It's like when we reached out to him for Godzilla vs. Chicago, I think his response was just like, hell yeah, let's do it. It's just this enthusiasm for doing this that's so infectious and so fun. And also, when it comes to the shared universe, I needed to find a writer who was game for collaboration. If you look at what Tim's done before with Batman Eternal and Grayson, he is a very collaborative writer. And also some of the other people we're working with on some of the sister books are these really new voices. They're new to the industry. So having Tim as this anchor, this person who's done it before, knows what he's doing, is such a strong backbone. As the old man, as he's the lone wolf and we're his cubs following him around. But as the backbone to the whole thing was so important, and it's really felt that way working with him. So it's been just fantastic to have him on the team.
Sure. Now, Tim said earlier, you guys needed to do some Godzilla shit. That's a quote. He also said that, what was the other thing that you mentioned? Something that Jake wanted, Tim. He wanted Godzilla shit, and he wanted something else.
He wanted to make it comic booky?
Comic booky. So let me ask you this. Thank you, Aaron and Tim both. When you say comic booky, yeah, when you say, Godzilla shit, what do you mean? Or at least what are you envisioning when you ask for something like that?
Yeah. Jake, what do you envision when you ask for Godzilla shit?
Well, I can talk a lot more on the comic booky part of it.
Sure.
The comic booky part of that thing was the Kai-Sei Era is this whole comic book line that is attempting to really utilize what the comic book medium has to offer when crafting a Godzilla story. I think that a lot of times with licensed comics, they can just turn into these these reproductions of what you're seeing on the screen, these approximations of the film. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to just make the most comic book version of a Godzilla story possible. And that means leaning into the tropes, leaning into the spectacle, leaning into that we have super stylized artists across the board. You're not going to see anyone trying to approximate reality as far as Oliver Ono or Pablo Tanuka or Nikola Čižmešija, but it's just these really fun, vibrant, stylized things. We have these freakish characters that you would never see on the screen for a Godzilla thing. Tim, I love whenever Tim mentions the powers that our main character has. He always describes it as his powers that he can punch Godzilla, which I love.
It's a very specific power set that you need in order to punch Godzilla.
He's allowed to punch Godzilla.
You know exactly what I mean. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, so that's the whole thing, is we wanted to create these characters that could only really exist on a comic book page that can replace the kind of more standard human characters that you see and get kind of bored of depending on what the Godzilla film is. We want characters who can directly interact with Godzilla and the other kaiju. And because it's a comic book, we get to do that in a way that you can't do on a TV screen or a film screen. So that was kind of what I was asking for. And Tim knocked out of the park, if he wants to take it from there, on how he delivered.
Well, I mean, I think, one thing we kind of agree, that the Godzilla shit part of it, I guess, is that there's so many films that are part of this, and they have different tones. There are sort of comedic Godzilla films, and there are dead serious Godzilla films, and there are really sci-fi Godzilla. There's all these possibilities for that, and there's all kinds of different bits and pieces that kind of always appear. Like G-Force and certain kaiju and stuff. And so what Jake wanted, I think, was let's make it feel like those movies, but it feels like a remix, which is kind of the way we approach it, which is it's not beholden to any specific movie or sort of version of a continuity that you've seen, but it feels like all those things. It all feels relevant. It all feels like it feeds into this larger picture. Being that it kind of came from a lot of familiarity with it, it allowed us to kind of cherry pick this stuff that we felt would really work inside this world, but also, this is the first time you've seen like, a continuity in which Godzilla has been around for this entirety and changed the world. Like our world in this universe is Godzilla showing up in 1954 made this a different world of Earth than you live in, and so it's got all this sort of world building that we have to do because we made up essentially a new place. What happened to America? What happened to Japan in this time, and everything in between. So it had to feel Godzilla, but it had to be new. So I think that's kind of the edict, and that was the most fun part. It's like, it's essentially doing like a big fantasy sci-fi world as if you made it up from scratch, except you're going to be like, oh, also one time, the reason this place is like this, because 50 years ago, Anguirus knocked it over. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you get to see what Godzilla's destruction creates, which is such a fun, part of that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love. You get the second and third order effects of this monster coming out of the ocean in 1954. But what I'm kind of curious about, and I really want to get into the a little bit more of the synopsis in a second, but I got to ask you both, and Jake, I kind of want to start with you on this one as the editor. When it comes to kind of the Godzilla in essence, it has been used in so many different mediums and in different installments. I mean, you've had the CGI versions that are on Netflix. You've had was it 2003 or was it 98 where it was Matthew Broderick and Godzilla? Like
the best one, as it's known by many people.
Yeah.
God. And then obviously all of the classics, the crossovers. Like, did you guys feel, like, was there any pressure and creating like almost, again, your own iteration, your own universe with such a substantial group of characters and kind of creating this I don't know, it's your own like real universe installment, because everything else has kind of been acceptable and okay, but like so many people are already excited about this one. So was there a lot of pressure?
Yeah, so for me, what really takes the pressure off is that I hire really good people to make it, so maybe Tim feels a lot of pressure, but I just believe in Tim, so it works out, and part of the fun of comics is that you get to be really generative and really weird with it, and at the end of the day, like, it's not like a movie. When you put out a movie, there's such a marketing campaign behind it that so many people go to see it that, like, if that goes bad or it's bad and people hate it, you really hear from them. Where when it comes to like a Godzilla comic, like, if people hate it, that kind of just means they didn't read it, like the eyes just weren't there. So the best thing we can do is just get more people to read a Godzilla comic than ever have, which you can only do if it's good. So it's almost like there's a lot of upside to this and very little downside. And, I see Godzilla as a character that it just works in a lot of different contexts, It's not something, it's an idea so big that we can't mess it up, and that's
a super flexible character.
Exactly. Right? And the essence of Godzilla is very much present in all these books. So we just give it a new context to destroy, a new world around it to knock down. And because of that, it just feels like the core is still so baked into what we're doing that, honestly, no, very, very low pressure. And it's just been really fun the whole way. And all of the creatives we brought on to work with have added so much that it's just felt really perfect, It just felt really good and cool the whole time. So I don't know.
That's
Tim,
awesome.
If you have different thoughts on that. But.
So Jake has no pressure, but Tim might.
And I don't know. I've worked on the things that you get the most shit for. Like I worked on Nightwing, for Christ's sakes. Like, you can't, what I mean? I wrote Rogue Savage Land. Like, what are you going to do to me? Like, so I don't. Well, I mean, I always feel a little nervous about messing with old, legendary, well-beloved properties like this. Like, I do feel a little bit of pressure, but I also think, like, I'm a genuine fan of this stuff, and I feel like I understand what makes this work, which I think that's the job, is that you go back through and you say, well, why is Godzilla beloved? Why is Godzilla important? And the thing that Jake and I kept coming back to is the idea that, Godzilla is a sort of metaphor, obviously, for, the Earth slapping back because humans messed with it. And that's even the sort of, sillier Godzillas where he talks and stuff, whatever, or has a kid or whatever. Yeah. It's Manila is the real baby Godzilla. But, but, that if you keep that core, if that's what it's about, I think you're doing it right. You could still live within that space and explore different versions of that. But so we kind of took that as humans tried to change the world in their way. The earth clapped back. And then, as humans will do, they try to take advantage of the power that was just used against them, which is what humans would do. So it's keeping that as our sort of our guidepost. All the characters that live within the world kind of have to react to that reality. When we made up a new bad guy, we went back to that idea. Godzilla is the Earth's vengeance upon us. And so what is the bad guy, right? So I think we figured out some pretty interesting ideas. But the core of it has got to be, you just have to write good character stuff. You have to write good people stuff. They can live in a world full of monsters, but if the monsters attack and you don't care about the people, the monster doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And so, there are great kaiju movies, and there are bad ones where you don't give a shit about any of these people, and you just kind of, and we try to go on the version of we have to make the great one. We have to make the one where, yes, you get awesome monsters and killer fights and Jet Jaguar punches the Godzilla and all those things. But you have to care about the people that are around those characters.
Yeah, I always love the fact that, primarily in these kaiju films, it's the humans that are the real monsters at the end of the day.
Well, look at you, Millie Bobby Brown.
Well, let's talk about this first issue of Godzilla, which hits store shelves July 23rd, and where the universe really picks up with this one. So here's a synopsis. It's 1954, and an experiment with a mysterious energy source called Kai-Sei has awakened Godzilla. For decades, humanity has endured an onslaught of monster attacks. While Japan views these unstoppable rampages like natural disasters, the United States' G-Force is attempting to fight these seemingly immortal titans. Now they've found a boy who wields the power of Godzilla. Will he save the world or bring about its doom? Or will he just punch him really hard?
What a killer summary of this world. That's it right there.
Yeah, sounds like somebody in here may or may not have written that exact synopsis. I don't know.
Well, Jake, with Godzilla Escape the Dead Zone and Starship Godzilla coming in the fall, what were your first steps with all of the creators when laying down the directional foundation of the shared universe? And I know you said make it comic booky, but was there anything else that you kind of walked in there and was like, this is the roadmap?
Yeah. So I wanted to explore different kind of the archetypal comic book genres in this, right? So I wanted to do a superhero-y kind of ultimate X-Men style book, which is the one that Tim is doing. That's Godzilla, right? It's just people with powers fighting massive kaiju. And then outside of that, I had this idea for this I was calling them outside the wall and inside the wall books, and that wall became the physical wall of Dead Zone. And I had this idea for a dystopian world, and I knew I wanted there to be kind of a wandering Ronin who goes from town to town, and that connecting these different kind of destroyed kaiju infested areas. I think initially I was there's one continent where kaiju first attacked, and that's kind of our savage land, and we want a character who goes around that. And it was very very loose synopsis. And I met Griffin and Ethan, the supple boys from Matthew Rosenberg's podcast at San Diego Comic-Con, and I invited them to pitch ideas to me, and they sent me a bunch of different Godzilla ideas. And I basically was like, hey, instead of doing one of these, do all of these and put them in this world. So basically we've created this mix of Mad Max and Over the Garden Wall, where we're having this cast of characters starting with this half kaiju, half human, this mutant hybrid, which again, that's such a comic booky thing that works in the comics. Yeah. And I don't think you're going to see that in Godzilla -2. I think that's very much
that's some Godzilla shit right there.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
So we have this characters going from town to town, and all these stories that the boys have been talking about are now episodes. They're the issues. That's what's happening to him. He's meeting these new characters and having these interesting little interactions. So I saw Godzilla as our superhero book, even though that grows and changes in so many ways. Godzilla, the book that Tim's writing is going to be so many different cool things. That's just how it starts, right? And then it evolves from there. And then I see Dead Zone as sort of our Wandering Ronin, our Vertigo book, our Walking Dead book, right? It's goopy, it's weird, it's strange stuff is happening over there. And then Starship Godzilla, I didn't solicit the idea for that at all. That was a book that Chris Gooch pitched to me as a much weirder book when it first started. The initial take of this book was thousands of years into the future, and it was actual Godzilla. So Godzilla itself had been turned into a spaceship.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So one thing when it comes to pitching is I'll send my rep at Toho. His name's Aaron John Gregory. He's one of the coolest guys in the business. I'll send him something and I'll be like, do not show this to Japan yet, but can you just let me know how off base we are? Or what is a version of this that we could do? And Aaron was like, you can make it Mecha Godzilla. There's no chance you can do it as regular Godzilla. So I went back to Chris. I kind of pitched the Kai-Sei Era to him. I told him I'd want this to be involved in that. And from there, I was like, I think you should just take space. Like taking your idea to have a Godzilla spaceship. Let's make it Mecha Godzilla. We'll call it Starship Godzilla. And then up in space, just connect that world. We'll keep everything, all the simians and the zillions, like that's your world to play around with. All the space kaiju will exist up there. So for the start of this era, everyone's very sequestered off, right? So Dead Zone is literally walled off from what Tim's doing, and Starship Godzilla is light years away. And then we're kind of right now, as we talk about like phase 2, second story arcs, like right now, Tim and I were talking today about having a meeting with the Dead Zone guys to talk about kind of, universe evolution from there.
No, I love that. It sounds like what's his name from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia? He's like pointing at the wall with like all the string in the pictures.
Yeah,
Charlie.
Yeah.
Well, that's funny because you touched on our next question, which has to deal with Toho, because we wanted to know, like Tim, like what does your creative relationship look like with Toho, or is it just you, Jake? Are you only repping with them? And how much and do they have any creative involvement in all of this?
I mean, Jake, this is one for you because so far all I know is like these guys are so cool. Like this lets do so much shit, but I know you have to do a lot more work than I do.
Well, Tim, have we had to really tell you no yet? Like, has there been a thing that you were like, you couldn't do? Like, as far as like Godzilla rules? Yeah, I don't think so. In fact, Tim and I are talking about Arc 2 right now. And the thing we're looking at right now, I kind of can't believe we're going to get away with if we end up with that route. But Toho approved it, and it's absurd. It's absurd what we're looking at. So, and that's kind of my fun thing. The fun thing too is right now, like I love Arc 1. I love where Arc 1's going. It's introducing the world. It's introducing the universe, and it seems like what Tim is building with Arc 2 right now is going to be like, oh shit, that's where you guys were going. That's what you meant by Power of Godzilla. That's what's happening. So there's so much fun stuff there. But my relationship with Toho, and I worked with a lot of licensors, but Toho specifically, they're so collaborative. They really understand that. And why we did the Kai-Sei Era specifically is because Godzilla itself, it's not a character in a traditional sense. It cannot grow, it cannot change, it cannot have human emotions. Godzilla is a force of nature. And as long as you keep Godzilla as a force of an ultra powerful, colossal force of nature, you build up any context around it that you want. And they just say yes. They don't tell us no. So when Tim creates a new kaiju, that new kaiju can do really crazy stuff. And you're going to see at the end of issue 1 that these new kaiju do things you've never seen a kaiju do before. And that's really exciting and fun. And my relationship with them, it's always like, if they have to say no, it's always like, no, but. And I think you saw it with the Starship Godzilla comment, right? It's like, it can't be actual Godzilla. You guys are being insane, but it can be Mecha Godzilla. And in general, when they say no and put up these guide rails, I find it as like, it typically helps. It helps us find like a better solution around the thing. And typically they're just saying no because they're like, hey guys, Godzilla's an established character. And if you're making comics about Godzilla for a reason, and part of that is because Godzilla does do this and it doesn't do these things, So it all makes a lot of sense to me at the end of the day.
Sure.
I love that approach.
Jake, I have to give you major props here because we've already sort of talked about the cast of creative teams that you've sort of assembled for this entire new universe. Again, Tim, one of our great current writers, Eisner nominated. You've got the Supple Boys, Ethan and Griffin, both who I think are some of our best young writers coming up with, of course, Kill Your Darlings over at Image Comics. And of course, Chris with Inutaro last year was insanely good. And this is no slight to, Oliver or Pablo or even Nikola at all. But I think the writing team for each of these installments is incredibly impressive. And I'm just so excited to see what everyone does with this universe going into the latter part of this year. And I think it makes sense that Tim would be the first person to kick all this off.
Yeah, thank you, man. And I mean, the writers have been incredible. They've all been so fun to work with. Tim and I have another project we'll be announcing soon, but Tim is so sick because he is just a writing machine. You can give.
He's working on so many things all the time.
But he's so good at it. And he is the comic book writer. And you can feed Tim a couple ideas and be like, I think it should maybe look like this. And Tim will be like, great, here's a script and it's perfect. And it's like, oh, awesome. Perfect. I love it. And then it's really fun working with the Supple Boys, and I think they're moving away from that branding, but it's so hard not for me not to call them the Supple Boys. But with Griffin and Ethan, because you really just feel that like young writer hunger with them. And like I said, like when I solicited ideas from them, they sent me like 10, and they were all great. And the stuff that they're bringing to the table in Dead Zone is just absolutely absurd. It's so crazy, and it's so fun, and it's so weird, and it's just exactly the type of comic book I want to read. And then, Chris Gooch is just a genius, as you know, from his top shelf graphic novels. He's a genius. He understands characters so well. The book is like, it's so fun because Chris is he's so good at the soap opera part of it. He's so good at like the human element. And sometimes I have to be like, Chris, this is perfect. If you don't give Oliver more action to draw, I'm going to kill you. But he's such a genius, and the book's so sick. And yeah, I'm so proud of all of them. But I will say the time that I really breathed a sigh of relief was Pablo. I think Pablo was the last artist to sign on. It was either Pablo or Nikola. And at that point I was like, oh, these are going to be good. These are going to be fantastic. All three of these artists are so good that like this can't be bad now. The book's going to look beautiful, which is most of what a comic book needs to do. So yeah, just incredible creative teams all around. Couldn't be happier.
So just between this little group, it won't go anywhere. But you can be honest with, Ethan and Griffin.
Yeah.
They had at least one crappy idea, right?
Right.
You can just tell us.
1 to 3. You can be honest.
1 to 3, maybe.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Here's the thing. I never want to say this. They sent me 20 ideas and 10 were just dog shit.
Yes. You hear that, Ethan and Griffin?
You hear that?
Suck it.
Yeah. We should put a quick disclaimer out here. We're actually really good friends with both Ethan and Griffin. I roomed with so before the Kill Your Darling, actually 2 years before Kill Your Darlings, Ethan, myself, and Griffin all roomed together at San Diego Comic-Con. So we've been friends for many years before they even went off to Image Comics. And not only are they two of my favorite creators, Kill Your Darlings was my favorite book. That was 2 years ago that came out. Favorite book of that year. One of my favorite first issues, maybe just like, I wouldn't say ever, but just like in recent memory for sure. And they deserve all the praise that they're getting. So excited they're getting all these opportunities. But Tim, I want to sort of branch over to you really quick. I want to noodle on an idea here because you said something earlier and it made me think of all of us sort of have a version of Godzilla we appreciate and enjoy more than others. I wanted to sort of talk about your longstanding relationship with the character. Many folks listening probably already know that Godzilla was originally created as this representation of Japan's perspective on the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'm curious, you mentioned that you were a fan of the films when you were much younger and probably even still to this day, but like, what is your North Star with this character going into this brand new universe?
I mean, 54 for sure, the original Godzilla, because of that, it's a horror movie. And I'm a horror movie guy. But, I also recognize that there's so much value in making Godzilla a character for kids, so, and I also recognize, I'm not like precious about stuff. Like, I think there's totally ways to do good versions of everything, but 54 definitely my favorite. And then my favorite of the Heisei era is Godzilla versus Destoroyah. That one's amazing. That one is the great one where you get this like emotional thing when Godzilla's son is killed, and it's spoilers, but it's awesome. It's such a good movie. Yeah, that one's great. And then, I mean, Final Wars is so insane. I can't help but not love it. I don't know, I don't think I put it in the same category as sort of the quality of something like Shin Godzilla, which I absolutely love. And then, man, I think Godzilla -1 is probably the second best Godzilla movie. And I can't believe that that's the most recent one. It's just,
it's incredible,
so good and so well done and so personal. And they set the standard for human character interacting with Godzilla. Right? That how do you make a movie about a giant monster, but we also got to care about a person? And you give this, sort of failed, a bomber. I mean, what an idea, So it's So but I can also just sit and watch, Godzilla versus Megalon, which is so dumb and so fun and so silly. And any of the Mothra movies, for some reason Mothra just really appeals to me. I'm not sure exactly why. It's such a silly, beautiful idea, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's just like, it's not one that's easy to translate. Godzilla's easy to translate to the US, but like, you know, if you've seen the Mothra cycle of movies, like, if you brought that over here, you'd just be like, I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know what that was. I know. So yeah, but so, you know, but I think there's value in just about every, you know, I really like the legendary ones too for a very different reason. But I think they're well done. I mean, I think they're spectacle, but they're like, you know, amazing designs and stuff. Godzilla Kong stuff. I love that stuff. What you wanted when you were a kid, but done like with sincerity in a weird way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Big lizard punches big monk.
Yeah.
You know,
how do you beat that? I mean, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And I think they've sort of figured that out at Legendary and Warner Brothers, is that like, we just want to see Big Monk, Big Liz go up against another big something. We don't care what it is. And honestly, I think they just recently announced the title for the new one, Aaron. I don't know if you remember what that is off the top of your head, but some people have speculated that we're going to get our first you know, out of space kaiju, someone that comes to Earth to fight, which I think was it Ghidorah is technically from space, but like I think was he in ice at the beginning of that movie? I can't remember. The point being is that they're fun. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So
I hope we get Space Godzilla. That is my favorite kaiju design. It's Godzilla with giant crystals on him for some reason.
Giant crystal boob shoulders.
He's got like shoulder pads in there. Yeah, they're healing quartzes. I don't know. It's awesome. I love that design so much.
It's his white woman's Instagram Godzilla.
Well, you know, Tim, I don't want to deviate. I guess I am going to deviate purposefully away from Godzilla really quickly because I have to ask you. You know, having you on the show, it would feel odd not talking to you at least a little bit about, you know, Revival, which has its first episode coming out next week over on Sci-Fi. June 12th, that first episode comes out. I'm not sure how much you can or even really want to talk about this, but I'm just curious, like, what has been your experience with, you know, that show being made, now coming out? You know, how has this all been for you as one of the original creators?
Well, this one's a weird one because I am very actively involved in this TV show because the deal that we did originally, you know, I told you guys some before, like what happened with Hack Slash, where I sold something to a studio and then I'm not part of it, you know? Mm-hmm. And so with Revival, I was like, I'm not going to do that again. And so I took a big risk, but instead of going with the studio, Mike and I decided to deal with a small production company here in Illinois. So they're like in Champaign, which is, you know, not Hollywood at all. Mm-hmm. And that was, you know, we developed this with them. The director, producer, Luke, who became the showrunner, you know, shepherded this thing for 8 years to get it done and, you know, relied a lot on our input and our feedback. And so this one is weird because it's not like I wasn't part of this. This isn't like, I'm like, hey, they made a show. Cool. Here's my check. You know, it was like, this was like being involved. This was going to the meetings, meeting investors, like doing stuff that I felt I should have just been doing the entire time because, you know, taking a check and looking the other way just didn't work for me at all. So, you know, it's seeing it, and primarily it's the work that Luke did. Like, I worked on Revival for 5 years every day. Luke has been working on Revival for 9 years every day. And, you know, so he's worked on it more than I have. And so I'm seeing this, like, finally, like, one, I'm so glad he's getting to see this brought to, you know, to everyone's television box. And, you know, for us, this was a risk. It was a crazy idea and it worked. You know, so hopefully people get to enjoy the show and it pleases the fans, but brings in lots of new people too.
What's your plan for the premiere of the first episode? Do you have some kind of launch party or something that you were planning on doing?
No, I'm going to be in the woods with my family camping, so I won't know. I don't even know. I'm not going to see the internet. I have no idea what people think of this thing. I've seen the first. I've seen a bunch of episodes already, and I was there for the filming of the last one. So, but yeah, we did. At my house, we had a little barbecue and watched it with the producers and stuff, and got drunk. And then, but yeah, we haven't done like a big event. And then I'll be in the woods next week in Michigan somewhere. So whatever happens, if it tears the internet up or, you know, if no one watches, I won't know. I'll just be sitting around a campfire, farting and eating hot dogs. It'll be great.
You'll be having your own revival.
Exactly.
Well, okay, one more adaptation question. I just need to know, when the heck are we going to get a Local Man live adaptation? That's what I need in my life. Not that, no disrespect to Revival, but Local Man is by far my favorite thing you've ever done. And that just feels so presently, it would work really well, I guess, in 2025 is my question. And
we signed up with the guys who did Revival to do.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so yeah.
Nice.
Good deal.
All right. Well, I mean, I think that's kind of a lot of the questions that we have for the body of this interview, but we always like to ask our creators, before you go, we like to ask our creators one last question, which is, what have you been really enjoying? I mean, be it comic, movie, TV series. Well, I mean, we know Tim's choice in TV series, prose novel, podcast, album, whatever. What have you been obsessing over? We'll start with you, Jake.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot of manga lately. That's kind of been a big thing that I've been doing ever since. I'm reading so much manga the last couple of years. I don't think Tim realized I was a comic book fan when he first met me, because I was just talking about manga. I'd be like, no, I grew up.
Just thought he was a weeb.
Yeah.
Who is this weeb?
But I just read through Death Note for the first time ever, and that was one where I was like flipping through. I was loving it so much. As far as comics coming out, I am like the biggest Department of Truth fan. I think Department of Truth is one of the best comics ever. I think it's such a brilliant premise. For anyone who doesn't know, it's X-Files, but in a world where like public belief shapes reality. I think it's just fantastic. And I don't think I'm watching any TV shows right now, so that might be it. Movies, I loved Friendship, so lots of
I went and saw that last week too. Very good. Yeah,
it's so funny.
Very funny. Yeah,
incredible.
Tim, how about you?
Let's see. Comic wise, I've been reading Tank Girl of late. Yeah, I'd read it in the 90s, and I bought it came with these new color collections. I kind of wanted to steal some of the vibe for our Godzilla book, but also I just wanted to see like where this came from. And it was interesting when I was reading. My 5-year-old came up and she was like, "Hey, is that the gorillas?" Like she recognized the style somehow.
Yes.
Whoa, that was incredible. I've been enjoying the hell of that. And then I just watched last night, and it kind of destroyed me. I don't know if you guys have seen The Rehearsal, which is Nathan Fielder.
Yeah.
The first season of that show is incredible because it's essentially he tried to make one show and it was completely derailed by the pandemic. And then he comes back in the second season and you're like, well, how do you top that? And he does. It is the craziest. I think it might be one of the craziest TV shows I've ever seen, because the premise is essentially a comedian, Nathan Fielder, discovers in real life that the cause of many plane accidents is that the pilot and the co-pilot don't talk to each other. So he's going to bring this to Congress, and the entire season is about him figuring out how to communicate, how to rehearse for, this revelation, which is true. And then it just ends in the most devastating, emotional way you can think about. So if you haven't ever seen that show, watch both seasons. It is. If you're like have a cringe problem, this might be not for you. But I bathe in your cringe. So.
Does he die in a plane crash?
No, but it is. I mean, I don't want to ruin it for you, but it is almost as shocking as that.
Oh, okay.
I've heard that Nathan actually got in a little bit of hot water. I'm sure, I mean, this makes sense to a lot of people, but he got in some hot water with the FAA because of the series.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a reason. The thing that happens at the end, you're like, oh, that's why.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I've heard nothing but incredible things, so I'm very excited to
check that
it out. So
I've been binging nothing but Love on the Spectrum, and it is crushing me, but also like for some reason making me question a lot of my my life and my mindset.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh man, am I on the spectrum?
Aaron has been talking about Love on the Spectrum, I think, for the last 3 episodes in one way, whether it's a quick reference or if it's like a 10-minute recap of the most current episode. So
my biggest problem is when I was a kid, like I'd watch stuff and I'd be like, oh, I could do it. I could do that. Like I used to binge watch all of X-Files, and I'm like, oh, I could be an FBI agent. And so like now I'm watching Love on the Spectrum.
I could be on the spectrum.
I might be on the spectrum. So it's like I got to stop watching these shows. Like next I'm going to start watching my 600-pound life, and I'm just going to start eating pizzas. Like I could do that.
If you're obsessing about autism, do not watch Rehearsal season 2 then.
Aaron's like, I'm going to take down the FAA. Just one random day he's going to come in and be like,
yes,
taking him down.
Burn it down.
Well, Jake, Tim, what a great pleasure it was getting both of you guys on here today to talk about Godzilla and everything that we talked about here, the Kai-Sei Era, everything at IDW. Once again, that first issue of Godzilla from Tim and Nikola comes out on July 23rd, and FOC is actually on June 9th. So everyone that's listening to this episode should be out before June 9th. Call your local comic book shop right now as you're listening to this conversation with Jake and Tim. Go ahead and pre-order that first issue. Aaron and I have had the pleasure of reading that first issue early, and we can tell you this is a great first installment to this brand new universe. If you have any, again, as we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, Aaron, a giant Godzilla fan, me, more of a passive fan, but still an enjoyer of that, that overall franchise. I can tell you we both enjoyed it on a very high level. So make sure you guys go pre-order that.
Pumped since reading the Free Comic Book Day, the Godzilla, the New Heroes, and just the art. Everything was so like enthralling, and like the art, every single like style of art that is in each of these stories looks fantastic. The characters are engaging. The writing is phenomenal. Of course, the big bad in Godzilla has to be an American general who's going crazy over a new source of power. But I'm just so excited because it has this almost like My Hero feel, with like new heroes coming out and this kid just coming out of nowhere. And it's just the most badass origin story where some kid gets blasted by a Godzilla power blast, and he's just like, well, gotta punch Godzilla, and he's flying out of the air. And I was like, this is going to be incredible. So I'm so excited for what you guys have in store for us.
Thank you. Yeah, it's absolutely, this is a book that we hope that just all comic book fans love. You don't have to be a fan of Godzilla. We made it just for comic book people. And yeah, I hope you love it. I hope you call and pre-order because I want Tim to write 100 issues of this book. So hell yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, before we let you go, Tim, I'm going to hand it off to you one last time. How can listeners follow your career? Is there anything that any upcoming work that you want to sort of plug or anything else before we let you go?
You can follow me on Blue Sky at Tim Seeley at Blue Sky, and I'm still kind of on Twitter and Instagram, Tim Seeley on Instagram. I've always got some shit going, so check it out.
Yeah, we didn't get to talk about Rogue. We didn't get to talk about Masters of the Universe. We didn't get to talk about like a lot of the other 7 titles that you're currently working on. So that we have to get you back on for that at least. Sure. And then Jake, over to you as well. Obviously, you're not writing any comics, currently, but how can people follow you if they want to know more about the Kai-Sei? I can't say it now. Kai-Sei.
Yeah,
universe.
You got it. Kai-Sei. Yeah. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Blue Sky at Jake_B Williams. And yeah, just buy comic books. Buy any comic book, and my name's sometimes in them. And I really don't care either way. So yeah, read comics.
Highly endorsed that last message.
Shop local.
Yes, that's right. Well, again, thank you, Jake. Thank you, Tim, so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
We'd love to have both of you back on again eventually at some point, whether it be together or separate. But we appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.